to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we take roll call, I'd just like to remind everyone that we are recording this meeting and it will be posted on YouTube. We'll give you a time frame for that a little bit later. So we do have quite a large audience today. I'd ask if you please refrain from any sidebar comments in the audience. If you have had an opportunity to review our last meeting, you can definitely hear comments that happen in the audience. So feel free to use our vestibule in order to have any conversations. Roll call, please, Stacia.
Steve Jarvis.
Here.
Bill Miner.
Here on the phone.
Jim Peterson.
Here.
John Johnson.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Consent calendar. Approval of 11/25/2019 agenda, approval of 11/12/2019 meeting minutes, and approval of claims. Any discussion?
Move the city administrator and Connie Walters down to action items.
Any other discussion? Those will become action items 6A1 and 6A2, making the agendized item approval of the visitor information center hours change 6A3. No further discussion, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please, Stacia.
Jim Peterson.
Yes.
Bill Miner.
Yes.
John Johnson.
Yes.
Steve Jarvis.
Yes.
All in favor, motion approved. Public comment. At this point in time, I'd like to invite any member of the public to come up and address the council on any matter that has not already been put on the agenda. We'd ask that you please limit your time to 2 minutes per speaker. Do we have anybody, any public comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to action items. 6A1, approval of the city administrator's salary. Any discussion? I guess I'd like to pose a question. We've all seen the newspapers, so it appears that we do have the judge's decision that's been rendered, and in fact, that decision was entered this afternoon. So I'm kind of curious as to why we're continuing to isolate the city administrator as well as Connie Walters' pay.
Good question.
Yeah?
Probably going to go to a higher court.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? All right. Action item 6A1, city administrator's salary. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion to pay the city administrator's fee or salary. Is there a second?
I will second.
Motion and a second. Roll call vote, please, Stacia.
John Johnson.
No.
Steve Jarvis.
Aye.
Jim Peterson.
Yes.
Bill Miner.
Yes.
3-1 vote approved. Action item 6A2, pay for planning and zoning coordinator Connie Walters. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
We have a motion to approve the pay for Connie Walters. Do I have a second?
I will second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Bill Miner.
Yes.
John Johnson.
No.
Jim Peterson.
Yes.
Steve Jarvis.
Yes.
Motion approved 3-1. Action item 6A3, approval of 2020 Hill City Visitor Information Center hours.
So in our agreement with the Visitor Center, with the Chamber, to utilize that space, it's listed that the City Council wanted to review the operational hours for the following year. So typically in December, November, December, were brought their hours, their proposed hours for the upcoming year, and so that's in your packet. And so, according to our agreement, it's brought to you as an action item. You review it, ask whatever questions you may have, and then upon adoption, then it's good for next year. So I don't know if Janet's here to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions, conversation, discussion?
Make a motion to approve.
We have a motion to approve on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
It was a tie. Steve?
Okay.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please, Stacia.
Steve Jarvis,
Aye.
John Johnson,
Aye.
Bill Miner,
Aye.
Jim Peterson.
Yep.
Okay, action item 6B, Resolution 2019-13, approval of tax increment district number 2. Brett, can you please give us some background?
Yes, thank you. So this project has been bubbling for the past couple of years, at least, with a lot of different groups and people's hands touching it, and I'm very appreciative to everybody who's lent their knowledge and skill and resources to this effort, because this is exactly, I think, one of those projects that really Hill City can shine from doing it as a team. So, you know, a couple years ago, we did the comprehensive plan. We revisited that and edited it. That hadn't been done in probably 20 years, I think. And out of that, there was some discussion about affordable housing, the need for housing within Hill City. EDC ran with their own survey to see what's out there, see what people's thoughts are as far as housing within the area. The city, we actually conducted our own housing survey with a consultant that came back with some wonderful data on what we needed to have as far as new housing developed within every year going forward to meet the demand. And so based on that and the EDC's work, EDC really ran with the ball and said, hey, is there a way that we can obtain land or identify land, have a partner and a developer, work with the city to try to make this happen? You know, Hill City is the land is fairly expensive up here because everybody wants to live up here. And so the demand is great. So tonight you're going to hear, not so much from me, but I'll be here to answer kind of the nuts and bolts questions. But you're going to hear from Dan McNamara with EDC. He's going to present to you kind of a little bit more in depth of what their process was with the EDC to get us to this point. You're also going to hear from Toby Morris, who works with Dowry and Company. He's our bond guy that's worked with our general obligation bond, and so he's familiar with our finances, and he works essentially for the city. And then I know Jim Skull that is here for Skull Construction. He's the developer, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind any questions that would be thrown his way as well. So essentially, we want to tell you that story of what we're looking at here, kind of the background of it, the reasons for affordable or attainable housing, why the TIF appears to be the best solution to attaining that, and hopefully address any questions or concerns that you might have. I will say that this has gone through the Planning and Zoning Commission. We had a wonderful meeting with a lot of great questions, and I think we addressed all of them. Just on a side note, all of the state required notifications have been followed. All of the notices have been sent to the other taxing districts as it's per required by code. And so I appreciate Toby being kind of the main resource for getting all of that accomplished. So I will turn it over now to Dan McNamara to kind of give you the history and the evolution of it.
Good evening. Daniel McNamara, 125 Main Street, Hill City here. I've had the pleasure working with Christy and Chris and the group, and Bob. Bob was going to speak tonight, but he had to be in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and with the storm coming, he wanted to make sure he made his appointments. So I just thought what I would do is just touch on a few things. We've been working on this a lot. seems like forever, a couple of years it feels like. We had one group we were working with and it wasn't the right thing for us, so we did a little bit more searching. And with a touch out to Mr. Jim Skull, it just made more sense. The first one wasn't correct and the second one became very apparent it was. We've been over and over and over this, but I'll touch on a few things. The survey, first off, we did several meetings at the grocery store, not meetings necessarily, but we met with the people, we met with the school. And Chris or Christy, if there's something I missed, let me know. But we've got over 300 signatures from the public, people that came through, talked about different housing, what they would need, do they think there's potential for it. So we have over 300, I think just a little over 300 signed petitions. They did a survey that EDC did theirself. And in the results of that survey, 83 people said they were interested in housing in Hill City. 69 single-family homes, roughly 20 duplexes or townhomes or patio homes, whatever you want to call them nowadays. And 17 said they'd like to look at something for apartments. 27.8% settled for inadequate housing due to the cost or availability in Hill City itself. 18.9% found housing in other towns, the people that wanted to actually live here, relocate here, be here. 36% would have been better to commute to work if they lived in the Hill City limits, just due to lack of housing. 27% or 22 people who currently work but don't live in Hill City said they'd move here if they could find affordable place to live. 4 teachers in Hill City were hired that were looking for a place to stay, and they didn't find anything. There was, at one point in time, we were monitoring the MLS of the houses for sale. It indicates if you come up for sale, under that 300,000 range, sometimes it's limited. Then the next step was to find some land, and I think actually Jim looked at this property a long time ago, and we got into negotiating along with Kim Benning, and we got the price of the ground negotiated down to the point, at least it's affordable. The land's still, without the TIF, the project wouldn't work. The TIF helps reduce the cost of the lots, about, I think we figured roughly $33,000 per home lot, which makes a heck of a difference. The development plan changes a little bit. I know now some power lines may have to be moved, but we're looking like 22 single-family homes in that range of $200,000 to $250,000, 12 twin homes, $175,000 to $200,000. And the price is kind of a moving point, yet we're still working on it. I mean, potentially to bring it down a little bit too. What really made the project work is we found a local developer. Some of the other developers were out of the area. Some of them were pre-manufactured home, which is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But Jim just fits it. He's a Hill City person. He loves Hill City, and he supports us 100%. I mean, he's a real team player, and I think he'll be a benefit to our community, absolutely. And he's very happy about it too. The development tax, when completed, is an estimated by their numbers, and Toby can probably talk to that a little bit. We're estimated to be about $7 million worth of value. We've actually talked about, we're going to do first-time home buyer classes. We want to educate people maybe for their first-time homes, step-up homes. We've talked to a few banks. We're going to talk to a title company or two, and we're going to actually do classes. Christie's helped with that too, so that we can educate people on how to get into them. So it's not just simply, here's the project, here's the TIF, here's your lot, Jim, thank you very much. We're going to help him sell them too. We promised him we would. Touch on the back here. The investment into the property is about $1.2 million worth of infrastructure. They're estimated to be somewhere around $800,000 interest on the property as well. Everything will be done to city specs. They've been working with a lot of the city engineers now. Let's see. TIF itself, just for the people in the audience, it does not affect your property value. We can explain, Toby will probably dive into that a little bit deeper for you. It's just a really good project that I think the city's been working on a long time, and it fits a niche, I think, right now that people have been telling us they need. I think even Johnny Johnson, you were telling us the story. Your son was maybe potentially looking for a place as well.
Bought one in Rapid.
He bought one of Jim's properties in Rapid at his new area.
Just the other day. so-
Yeah, yeah. So it's just something that we appreciate your assistance. I know we've had individual meetings with all the council members. If you have any questions for us, please feel free. At this time, I'm going to let Toby dive into the specifics of it, unless you have any questions for me right now, but I'll be here, obviously. Thank you, Mr. Toby.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Mayor, members of the council. Toby Morris with Doherty and Company. I believe you all have a copy of the plan that's in front of you. What I don't want to do is minimize anything, so if I go over something that doesn't make sense, by all means, just stop me and we can address it. So I think what I'll do is maybe just start out with a global overview of how the TIF works. The TIF is only as good as the momentum that the developer brings to it, because what it is it's a future revenue stream that is paid back to offset the infrastructure costs that are incurred today. So I do my best ability in terms of looking at the projections and how it's going to build out. But if you have a case like a 2008, 2009, you can put all your money in infrastructure today, you get a bump in that economy, and those homes may not move as quick as you think. Being a public finance person, it's always my number one goal to make sure that there's no liability on the city. And in this case, the only liability you have is to pass on any positive increment. So if for some reason Jim does not generate any home sales or whatever, he's going to incur that cost. He's going to incur that $1.2 million of infrastructure cost, but by no means will his bank ever come to the city and say, well, you need to make this debt service payment. You're nothing more than a conduit at that time, and then we'll have it further developed out. This is the second of the third stage, and that's where the development agreement will come in, where I'll send you a draft, and we'll, I'm sure, work back and forth, but it's for the protection of the city as well as the developer on that. So how did we come to the costs? We came to the costs in terms of working quite closely with the engineer on where it was going to be. I think there was a lot of iterations, I think Brett would say, from water pressure to what's going to be included to the streets to so forth, and most importantly, the cost, if Jim was willing to take those on. And because there was some that might have been outside the normal purview of what you would see a developer would do, but I think for the benefit of the whole entire project, they were seen as, for one, very necessary, but two, for the overall development to be the proactive and to making sure it was a well-planned out development on that side. Because I'm not one as an engineer to look at the cost. I think we go back and forth multiple times with the engineer, and they're the ones, was it Kate out of Spearfish, the engineers?
No, they're Rapid.
Out of Rapid.
KTM, yeah.
KTM, that's right. A lot of K's, there's KLJs, KTM, I can't keep them straight. So that's how we derived at the cost. One of the things I've seen happen within TIFs throughout the state, and I do quite a few of them, is what I would say the accrued interest component. Because when you build something here in 2020, you're really not getting any kind of increment revenue to pay that debt back till the earliest of 2022 and maybe even into 2023. So what I was seeing is we were seeing that you start out with, say, $1.5 million TIF, and the next thing you know, it goes to $1.6 million, goes to $1.8 million because of all that accrued interest that was going into it. So I've taken a step back and even worked with the county commissioner in Pennington on another TIF that said, let's just input it from where it is today. We know if you borrow $1.2 million and I use an interest rate of 5.5%, that interest rate is going to ebb and flow over years. I think it's a very fair rate as of today. And we're in some of the record lows. You get into an area where we have increasing rates. Once again, we pass that liability back on to Jim and to what's going to be incurred. So we wrap this all up and we say, okay, the TIF now with the imputed interest cost is at $2 million. As increment comes on board, it becomes a dollar for dollar, as I like to say. So we don't have to worry about, well, was the payment made on April 21st and we have to go through our amortization table and all that. We simply know this. There's a $2 million, I'm going to call it a liability on the city, where you have the obligation to pay that on. If the increment comes in at $100,000, you now drop to $1.9 million. If that increment at the end of 20 years on your books is still showing $1 million, that's not your problem, that's Jim's problem. So he's going to get a dollar for dollar benefit, but you're going to also know that you'll never have accrued interest slipping away on you. I actually worked with one city and they had about 5 million of TIF on their books, and they had about 600,000 of revenue coming in, but only 100,000 amortized principal. And so that's where it's a timeout. We've got to look at this as a different approach on that. We know affordable housing is an allowable use of TIF. As Brad has said earlier, we have a letter from Department of Revenue that has classified this as affordable housing. I've submitted the plan to them. I work with them. They're on speed dial, and Toby's probably a 4-letter word to them, but we go back and forth on that quite a bit. So I can say we've complied with everything on that part. We've had the public hearing at Planning and Zoning. We had a great meeting, took some input. Your development group, I will say from all the TIFs I've done, I really commend them. In fact, I use them as an example when I was speaking at South Dakota Housing Conference of the proactiveness that we've seen within the state. The other side, or the other components of the TIF, are very statute related, so we had to have some findings in there. We did the study. If Jim completes the project on the projections that we had laid out, we can say that it'll generate roughly 2.3, 2.4 million of TIF revenue over 20 years. We have him capped at 2. So if the TIF pays off sooner, which the hope is, then the TIF dissolves and goes away at that time. Anything I've said at this point, I know I don't, like I said, I don't want to skip over anything by any means, but I know we're somewhat versed in TIF, and I'd gladly open for questions, or I could go through something very specific within the plan. Well, supersede, no questions, thank you.
For me,
I'm good.
Super. Like I said, the next component of it, assuming passed tonight, will be the developer agreement. I've started working on a copy. Like I said, I'll work with city attorney, submit it, so he reviews it, and then that's an agreement that's just entered in between. It's really the contract, the binding contract between the developer and yourself. It's straightforward. It's a partnership. There's no boogeyman in the contract, so. I don't know, Jim wants to talk anything on the development? I've always had a rule, if it's going my way, I shut up. So.
Before you run away, so could you give us a little bit of information on your experience with TIFs? I mean, have you been working with these for a long time?
You bet. I started working with TIFs when I went to work for Governor Janklow in 1996. At that time, TIFs were only used for industrial. And with Governor Janklow at that time, as those of you who might remember, he had his way and he had his way. And so we started to expand upon it when Governor Rounds came in, and that's where we put the economic development component. So I helped write the legislation at that time where we kept it broad. Economic development, as you hear me say, is a veterinarian in Eagle Butte, it could be an insurance company in Sioux Falls, and it could be affordable housing here. Over time, we've had to modify it. Our law came from Chicago, and one of the hardest things that we always had to get over is we had to blight an area. Well, blight is just a horrible word for South Dakotans, and we would run into so much opposition, especially when I'm blighting a cornfield for an industrial park. And so we changed the law again in 2012, and then I worked very closely. When I'm not doing TIFs, I advise the governor's office on their financings, and we took it a step further and worked very closely with Department of Housing, or South Dakota Housing and Revenue in 2015. As we said, we see a crisis coming throughout the state, and it's affordable housing. And so that's where we went and specifically changed the guidelines within the state to allow affordable housing. I would say I probably do about 70% of the TIF work in the state, and the other 30% is when I correct somebody else's. So. But it's an evolutionary deal. It really is, and it's a great tool. It's one of the only tools we really have for development.
Gentlemen, any questions?
when you guys come in and construct the houses, like you have some models and then construct them as they sell, or you're not gonna build the whole works?
That's what we're planning on doing, and we'll build them in steps, you know. I'm gonna come in right away, and my plan is this, to build two, and see how this works, you know. We're doing some of these right now in Rapid City in the area, a place called Raider Point by the Base, and amazingly, in 8 months, we've sold 26.
You know, I have a builder, I don't build them myself. Housing is a little outside, I'm more of a commercial builder and a developer of land. So this is Raider Point, 50 lots. We just talked to them today, they're running out of lots at a rapid pace. They're a real affordable home like this, 180 to 2 1/4. And they just have a lot of people in that market range, you know, that can afford a home. There's not many homes in that range, even in Rapid City. So that's what we're targeting here. This has been a little bit challenging. I looked at this land, I did look at it, because Economic Development contacted me over a year ago probably, and just said, is there anything you could do? So I looked around and with the realtor, and at $275 for this land, it was like, I'm buying land for $6,000 or $7,000 an acre and developing these same price point lots. That was probably $40,000 an acre, you know? And they came back to me when they negotiated down to 34 something. And I said that still doesn't create affordable land for lots. That just doesn't work. So they said, well, what can we do? And we started brainstorming about how can we get the price point down with perhaps a TIF. And then when we got into it, it got more interesting, and then we discovered we didn't have adequate pressures to support, 30 plus houses. So we dealt with that with the city engineers, and of course part of this project is upgrading water lines, not only for us, but for the whole region in the future. Upgrading some sewer lines, and then Top of Hill is not a very well-constructed road, so we talked about doing that. I mean, it gets kind of outside the project scope, so that's how we came into this. And then I guess I drew the line kind of as we can only do so much outside the project work. I mean, I end up being liable. So we came up with a number that works through Toby and working through it, that we can pay this off in a reasonable amount of time. And I mean, I'll take some risk. I don't want to take risk that's overboard. Because I just came from the bank and we had the same discussion. The buck stops right here. Not with you guys, it's not with me. So they're quizzing me, can you sell 5 to 6 houses a year? Which is, I'm hoping we can sell more than that. But the local market is such, it's not tested. There's, one house is, Jim, is there one house on the market under 250? And that's the way it's been. And so how many houses have you sold under 250? 3. Why? Because that's all that become available, and if they're cheap, vacation home buyers get them and put a little money into them and rent them. So it's it became kind of a lot of work, a lot of working agreements. How can we make this work and improve the quality of the city in that neighborhood and make things work long-term and actually improve some other lands adjacent to it, frankly, that will have adequate water and sewer and so it's kind of been a project. It's been kind of fun. It's rewarding to me personally, frankly. I really like Hill City. I think it's a fun little community. And there virtually isn't any land to develop. I mean, nothing. You just have nothing. You got to look long-term and try to figure that out a little bit, because sewer and water is so important to tap into if at all possible, and to have an adequate water pressures. We had a 3 meetings on that. How do we make that work? Making sure we have making it work. And so it's been interesting, but I think it can work. I think the local realtors are a little pessimistic, but even the pessimistic deal, I think we can make it work. So that's how we come to this point in time. So, but the TIF is absolutely necessary. There's just no way we can improve the area and what needs to be improved without it. So
You're not running out of lots, you're gonna get 34 more tonight.
really, really, I hope so.
Project in Rapid, are they selling quite rapidly down there too, or?
Oh man, lots like this. I do a lot of development work for other people, The one called Johnson Ranch, I don't know, they must have sold 35 houses in a year in the 180 to 190 range, 170 to 190. Just kind of little cookie cutter houses, because I mean, I don't find them incredibly attractive, but it just tells me the market is absolutely there for people who want a very simplistic home, but they want to own their own home, and that they can afford that price point. Where they can't afford what we call starter homes, there is probably now $235 to $275 as a starter home. These are really called affordable homes for people that just don't have the income availability. And I really like what they're doing. They're going to give a housing, how do you own a home class, economic development is. You'll find that's probably going to be necessary. People don't know about down payments and how do you maintain and keep up and be a good neighbor even. All those things that are actually important to be a homeowner in a neighborhood that works, so. Yeah, they're selling like crazy in Rapid City, it's just,
Bobby, thank Chris for selling the one in Rapids.
Yeah.
Because that was the paper that you gave me was for the Johnson Ranch one.
no.
You could have waited a week.
Yeah. Yeah, they can't build it fast enough. We slowed down another development, the same owner has, Diamond, it's called, and, because they can't build them, they can't keep up with the demand, so they said, no, we're not gonna develop any more lots. The builder has to catch up. He has to
Yeah, they
catch
said
up.
it wouldn't be done until May or June.
Yeah, I know, they're 6, 8 months out, and they're selling them 6 or 8 months. So I'm hoping the local realtors can pre-sell some of these, because they should be really fun houses, and a nice, it'll make a really cute neighborhood. And I think I can get a little park in the northwest corner, which should be really good, you know, for the kids. And we'll have sidewalks, curb and gutter, asphalt, all the streets up there will then now be paved with this thing we're doing in agreement with the city, so. It's pretty cool.
Good deal.
Jim, what are the average lot sizes?
They're about 5,000 square feet. They're like a Johnson Ranch, it was 50 by 100, you know. We had another problem that just came up, and that's that damn power line in the back there. It's not very efficiently located for building. We're checking to see if we can get it moved with reasonable cost. It's probably gonna cost about 35 to 40,000 to move it out of the way, which we'd like to do. This makes our lot size a little bigger, but, kinda lops off
Any
about
covenant
2 acres.
Any covenant controls or?
Covenants? Yeah, we're gonna have, I'm talking to Brett, either we're gonna have good covenants, or the city is gonna do something such that these can't be turned into vacation homes. I mean, that's the deal, is part of the problem in Hill City is vacation homes are off the market for rentals, so it's tough for the local people, or they're only here for a period of time.
Yeah.
So that's our goal, that we will do that one way or the other. I think that's a necessity for Hill City, that this be affordable housing that's there for the long term.
Yeah, and the VRBO thing is always kind of a contentious topic with folks that own property here. There's a lot of people that want it and a lot of people that don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I just finished up some litigation down in Custer County within the city limits, and the covenants were like 1990s vintage, so they didn't anticipate a lot of this stuff. But so the wording that was in there to control that, I felt was clear enough from the legal standpoint to be enforceable, but the argument was that it wasn't. And ultimately it settled, and the vacation home won't be there, but
Okay.
so we prevailed in that light. But that kind of thing, you know, in a community like Hill City is probably an important factor to look at. If you don't do it, if you do it by the covenant, then there could still be maybe a conditional use permit applied for.
Yeah, there you go.
But then that leaves the ultimate control here. But it would start at, you know, and then the city could say, well, before we do a conditional use permit on a vacation home in that subdivision, we would want to make sure that there isn't a covenant there. And if there is a covenant there and it allows any kind of discretion, has the board from the homeowners association approved it, you know, and put some layers, so it's not an absolute ban, but put layers
Yeah,
of
I
approval
like
on it,
that.
you know.
I mean, I believe in property rights,
Yeah.
and I believe in vacation homes. They serve a great purpose up here. It's
Yeah.
we're a vacation highlight. However, there has to be a limiting purpose here. You know, another thing we've added here, which we haven't talked about, we'll see, got to talk to the realtors a little bit, you know, about 6 or 7 mini homes, I call them, you know, that are maybe 400 or 500 to 700 square foot on a 2,500 square foot lot, which everybody talks about in the whole region, but nobody's done it. And I just think it might be interesting, you know, for a single person or an elderly couple that's just downsizing, they want their own home and their own place, you know, that maybe that would, it would be maybe, you know, in the $70,000 to $80,000 range, so it's very, very affordable. Might be a nice little add to it, and this little separate little area, actually, I've kind of have laid out, so we'll talk about that more. Or we'll do something else with the land, but just a little strip section.
With regards to vacation homes in there, can't you just handle that with a deed restriction?
Yeah, you could, but there again, it's always a matter of interpretation of the language. So you could do as a deed restriction, but I would think that if you want to maintain value in a subdivision,
you want to have some controls and keep everybody on the same page with it, but yet not make it so restrictive that, you know, vacation homes would be absolutely banned forever from there, because times change.
Yeah.
And that development may be different 20 years from now. And so you'd want to maybe think about giving authority to the board, rather than do things on a deed-by-deed basis, you know, do it on a development basis.
Yeah, I think we need to look at those layers, because you've got the deed restriction, you've got the covenants, but you also have an opportunity, because we're needing to pull building permits and work with the zoning there, and it looks like we could probably do a planned unit development here, which gives you a little bit more flexibility,
right.
and maybe we put it in as one of the zoning restrictions at it. That way we control, we're the gatekeeper here as it relates to building permits and that. So I think a layered approach is what we need to do to make sure that if that's the intent of it, that we accomplish it, of not having nightly rentals go through that process. So I think we need to look at all of those solutions, and they can work in tandem with one another, so.
Yeah. Good.
If I can just jump in real quick, after the council has had a chance to ask whatever questions, we just need to make sure we open it up to the public for any comments or concerns or questions or whatever, so just.
So any other
making sure we do
questions,
that.
gentlemen?
All right, Jim, are you looking at one builder, multiple builders, a team of builders? Or do you know yet?
Right now, I'm looking at one.
Okay.
You know, we look locally and we just can't find anybody that wants to build in that price range. That's kind of a unique builder,
Yeah.
you know, that can do it and make money, usually has that in-house subs almost. And so we're using the guy at Raider Point and Elite Builders, and, you know, he just feels real comfortable doing it. So it's kind of like he's been successful with us, so he'd be my first choice if I can get him to do it.
Okay.
Because he builds good houses and he's quality, and the local guys, they like to build a little upper scale house, and, you know, this is a different market.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, I'd like to now,
Kathy,
yep,
I would just like to thank EDC for all their efforts. I'd also like to thank Toby, and just for him, this is first time caller.
Long time listener.
yep.
Well, long time listener, first time caller. So, Mr. Skull, I really appreciate your investment in Hill City. And I would like to meet with you on the tiny homes or the smaller homes. I think I could maybe add some insight into that, if you'd like. But thank you so much for what you're doing for Hill City.
If I could just tie in with what Bill is saying, you know, Jim Skull and I talked about those tiny homes, and it's an interesting concept, which I think could be a very unique little element to this project. And like he said, there's not really a community that's doing it right now. There's talk about it, but nobody's actually stepped up to the plate and taken care of it. I also want to thank somebody. I want to thank Ron Rosknecht and the Pennington County Commission. They, about a month and a half ago, approved a resolution of support for the TIF here in Hill City. So I know I know they love Hill City, and that they're in favor of doing a project like this. It adds so much value to the community. So thank you, Ron. Send our best wishes back to the commission for us. So, anyway.
I'd really like to see those tiny homes.
Oh,
Rapid
really?
City zoning, a tiny home is 150 feet or larger, less than 600 square feet. And then you advance up to what they call the garden home, which is 601 square feet up to, I think it's 1,200 square feet. But
How would they appraise? That's one of my concerns. Appraiser, you put up your appraiser list.
well, after you sell 4 of them, I'll tell you what they're worth.
Okay. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and open it up to the public. If there's anybody that would like to come up and give us your thoughts, any questions, please come up to the front and clearly state your name so we can identify you on the recordings. Anyone? Anyone? Okay. With the silence from the audience, and I know folks have already said this, but I personally would like to extend my gratitude to all the folks that are involved in this. I look at the EDC, who I've sat as a representative of that board for a while, and those people took no for an answer. 2 years that I was there, all I heard was it won't pencil out, we can't make it happen. So thank you for your tenacious way of pushing this forward and not taking no for an answer. Mr. Ross Connect, being part of the EDC and understanding that everything that was going on, you've done a lot to help promote this and really bring Hill City to the forefront so people understand what's going on and get people excited about it. Mr. Scull, it goes without saying, this is not the first opportunity you've had and you've stepped up to support our community. So, as was stated in a prior meeting, you are part of Hill City. You're the Hill City community regardless of where you live. So thank
Great
you.
little place. I like
And
it.
thank you for all the work that you've done. I know this is no small feat. It
Taken a while.
It took a lot of hours. It took a lot of, I'd meet with Brett and Brett would say, well, I just got a call. And I said, is it a showstopper or can we work around it? So understanding that most of it was able to be worked around at this point was a good thing, and what the city is going to get in return for this. So it's not just a new subdivision that's going up there. We're going to get looping water in that area and pavement on streets that we probably wouldn't be able to do for many years to come. So I appreciate your work. And of course, Toby. Thank you, Mr. Morris, for all that you've done. I worked a little bit as a taskmaster. Does Toby have his date? So I know it was a little bit aggressive, but I appreciate all the work that you've done and the experience that you bring to this project. I think TIFs are evolving, and it's better to have the expert do it to make sure that it's done and done right. So thank you. And thanks to everyone in the audience for your interest in coming here and your participation and seeing Hill City grow. Mr. Ross Connect?
Kathy, I'd like to extend a special thanks for the record to Kip Matkins. Because if
Okay.
Kip wouldn't have been willing to extend these purchase agreements, we wouldn't be here talking today. So I think Kip's got a love for Hill City just like Jim does. And
Absolutely.
I just want to extend a special thanks to Kip for working with EDC and Jim.
And thank you, Ron. Thank you. You're right. It takes a village. It takes a village. So, now that we've got all that out of the way, let's talk about the important thing. If there's no more questions from the council, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Mayor, I'd like to make the motion to approve tax increment finance number 2.
I'll withdraw my motion.
So, Bill Minor is on record for approval of tax increment district number 2. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Stacia, roll call vote, please.
Jim Peterson,
Yep.
Bill Miner,
A very big yes.
John Johnson,
Yep.
Steve Jarvis.
Yes.
All right. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for all of your work. This truly moves our town forward in a positive direction. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to move on to report items. I typically report out first, but I want to change it up a little bit and give myself a little bit of a break, so I'm going to start out with the council. Mr. Minor, do you have anything that you'd like to report?
No, that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Jarvis?
Nothing.
Mr. Peterson?
The only thing I attended was the TIF thing, so.
Okay. And then, Mr. Johnson?
Ambulance meeting was Tuesday night at the library meeting.
Thank you.
Ambulance has 227 calls to date. They're still discussing the new radio system they have to put in shortly. Outside everything going along okay, and typical short meeting at the library.
Okay. Well, tonight we may match that. Okay, so for my report out, the first thing, planning and zoning met last week, and the major topic of conversation was the TIF, so not to be surprised. Their meeting for December 2nd has actually been moved to December 4th at 7 p.m. The intention of doing that was to allow the Planning and Zoning Commission to participate in the meeting and not incur any additional costs relative to the work that was asked to be done on additional clarification or additional outreach on the sign ordinance that has been proposed. So that meeting is now December 4th at 7 p.m. and a big item of discussion will be the sign ordinance. The first meeting did occur last week. It was at 10 a.m. I believe on a Thursday. Mr. Alexander was there, and then after the meeting had started, we had 2 additional business owners that came. We had Christy Hawthorne that came, and we also had Dale Kirsted that came. And they both came to show their support of the passing of it. So that's what was had at the first meeting, and the entire Planning and Zoning Commission came. Our holiday open house. So we're going to have our first, hopefully our first annual holiday open house here at City Hall. It's going to be on December 11th from 3 to 6 p.m. So come on out and have some snacks and let's share the holiday spirit. The city also has a tree on display at the Trees and Trains. So you'll be able to notice which one it is. There's things very specifically related to city functions and what we do here. So check that out if you have an opportunity to do so. We have a couple staff changes that are occurring here. We do currently have an interim finance officer, so the council has approved a temporary to permanent clerk position. That position is being advertised. It will be advertised in all of our major newspapers, and we're going to go through the hiring process. It's a temporary to permanent position, as at this point we can't offer full-time. We haven't had a confirmation yet on a full-time finance officer instead of interim. So I believe a lot of that has to do with timing and some uncertainties with elections. In addition to that, we have an opening for Public Works Director. This will be, again, advertised in media. We will be looking at the job description and then seeking approval from council to fill that vacant position now, so that position is also available. One of the last things that I'd like to talk about tonight, and something that kind of embodies the spirit of who I am, is how we communicate and questions that are asked and our opportunities to do that. I'm not a fan of having debates or conversations in email. We have these meetings here, and it's our way to talk about business, all business. So I believe that email can be an effective tool, but if there's questions asked, I have no certainty that there aren't other people that don't have those questions as well. So better to address in a public forum rather than going back and forth and not allowing the opportunity to share that information. So with that being said, I actually received 2 email messages from council over the time lapse from the last meeting to this meeting. And I'd like to read those email messages, and I'm also going to address the questions that are posed so we can show resolution and provide transparency when questions can be answered. So the first email I received on Friday, November 15th from Alderman Peterson. The email says, Kathy, first I appreciate your work into Public Works. I too believe there is an issue there, but believe the issue is throughout the whole city staff. It's a leadership issue in my opinion. Last Saturday I witnessed 3 Public Works people and our city admin presumably working the sidewalk project. I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of them. I would like to know why we needed 3 Public Works people on that day. I would like to know why Brett showed up that day. This is more of the management issue we have within our city government. My prediction is we will, quote, if investigated, hear all kinds of excuses. But what I saw was absolutely no value to have a city admin on site. The Public Works might be argued that 2 people could have helped in shutting off the water rather than 3, but I don't know. I do know that if this organization was actually ran responsibly and it was your money being spent, that I doubt 4 people would have been working that day. My 2 cents. When will the video from the city meeting be available to watch? And then there's some additional questions that need to be redacted as they're personnel issues. So to answer the first question and to provide a little bit of a background. So I currently just announced that we have an opening for Public Works Director. What that means is that we have a opportunity to bring in a leader, someone to lead that organization. The boss is not there anymore. When this particular incident happened, and I'm extremely familiar with it, because while it did occur on a Saturday, the work that needed to be done was related to the sidewalk. It was replacing curb stops. Okay, the staff that we have remaining, we have one that's still on discipline, so he's still on his probationary period, and we have three other potential staff people that could work on that were either not available that day or tied up. The situation with regard to what was happening is critical, okay? If that wasn't done correctly, we have a workaround that needs to be done. So it doesn't only involve shutting water off and turning valves, it means that we need to make sure that there's a continuous water supply. So with that being as critical as it is, one wrong move could have shut off water for half of the city. I don't know about anybody else, but I feel much more comfortable with the person who's accountable for the project not only being there, but also stepping up in a leadership role to make sure that the staff wasn't nervous. The staff had direction. There was somebody there if an incident occurred. It doesn't happen all the time, okay? This was scheduled for Friday. It had been moved up by the contractors. They couldn't get it done on Friday, so they had to come in on Saturday and do it, because it's a third-party contractor that was doing it. In addition to that, the staff worked really hard to make sure that those 4 to 6 hours that they used on that Saturday were not paid as overtime, but they used flexible time in order to make sure that they didn't exceed 40 hours that week. So while I understand and appreciate the question, and I do understand that there's an importance to treat money like it's our own, although it did not appear so, what was done was correct. And I wanted to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to hear that in the event that someone else had that question out there. We should applaud people for stepping up into leadership roles instead of condemning them for it. The second question about the uploading of the YouTube, that's something that a first-time go-around had to be figured out, had to be understood. How do we do it? So we're going to get tighter time frames on how we can do that, and Brett can possibly give us some additional updates on that. So those were the answers for that email.
So any further comment on that?
I'm answering the question, and this is my time.
Okay.
So I would invite you, after I have the opportunity to address the questions, if you have anything else that you'd like to say, I would welcome it at that point, but let me finish. The second email I received was dated Saturday, November 16th. This email was from Alderman John Johnson, and it was in reply to an email that I had actually sent out to the council on November 16th at 11:24 a.m. The response I got was at 4:40 p.m. The email that I sent out to the council was intended to be a notification to give the council advance notice that we were able to upload the YouTube video and that it was out there. Because shortly after I sent the email to the council, then I put it on Facebook. Now, that's not the most effective way to advertise that something is out there, and I realize that, but again, we were testing this to see just exactly how it would work and if it would be beneficial. The email that I sent is penned such as follows. The council meeting from November 12th, 2019 is now available for view on YouTube. To view, use the keyword search Hill City, South Dakota Council, and you can review. As we move forward with this, we will become more efficient with the upload process and will be able to set target timeframes for the upload and view time for the public. To accomplish this communication test, Brett has loaned his personal equipment. We will now be looking to obtain necessary cameras, etc., to continue to provide the service for citizens. I will be pushing this information out to the community and want to make sure you were advised. Here's the response that I received. Kathy, per your instructions, I did a keyword search of Hill City, South Dakota Council in Google. That's all in quotes. Receiving a search result of more than 10 pages versus to wasting my time viewing several pages of unrelated material. I searched the YouTube site URL, and the URL is provided, and did a search on the site for the provided information, result being, again, the link, and a direct link to the video. Since there appears that there is needed equipment for this adventure, have funds been appropriated or budgeted for the purchase of necessary, quote, cameras, etc., to provide this service, unquote? Has this projected been discussed with the council members, or is it the decisions of an individual, yourself? Has there been any input from the general public if the service is needed or will be used? Not only the investment, purchase of the related electronics, what is the cost factor of city personnel to make the service available to the public? Since I imagine not only city council meeting, but planning and zoning meetings would be available. This would be a minimum of 4 meetings per month. What time factor for city personnel is involved per month? I believe city personnel's time can be better used in, quote, real, unquote, city business. If so, maybe it would not have taken several years to complete the sidewalk project or the years that have been spent related to the new city water tower project that still is not completed. Since there appears to be a, quote, push, unquote, for the general public to be informed of, quote, what is happening, unquote, in Hill City. What was the purchase price of the telephone interface that is being used at present? As I don't recall seeing it on the claims unless I missed it. A project that I don't recall being discussed with the council or researched very well. A service that will allow, quote, anybody and their dog, unquote, to call in during closed sessions without anybody's knowledge and monitor closed sessions. Not a very, quote, secure system. I recall you stating you are looking at the liaison positions and possible to able to make a cost savings. It appears that the cost factor is at a minimum versus to the funds that are being wasted today. Just to mention in the near past, money spent to rapid rooter, stocking fees on snowplow, related cost on having the plow removed, money down the drain. I think the positions are needed to supply a good relationship and line of communications between the different organizations that operate in Hill City. As well, a little knowledge of the spending of funds that the city support financially. Personally, if I did not have to attend the couple of extra meetings each month that I do, it would give me a few hours of my life to do whatever I wanted to do for myself. So, in looking at this email and addressing this, I appreciate Mr. Johnson bringing to the forefront the fact that I had made an assumption when I indicated that it was on YouTube. I made the assumption that people would access the YouTube application and they would do the search in there. It appears that Mr. Johnson went to Google and did the search, so I know that I need to be more clear in my communication and how I direct people and inform people. When it comes to the necessary cameras cost, all of the information provided, here's what we're looking at for costs. The conference phone that you see sitting there is not only intended for use with council meetings or planning and zoning meetings, it's a way to have a conference call on projects or other things that we have in this organization. It's a piece of office equipment and the one-time cost was $99 for that. When I look at the recording costs that are associated with the meetings and the meetings being on YouTube, so this is just a beginning in ways that I feel that we can provide information to the community. I recall sitting here for several years and listening to people say, well, we have meetings and they don't just come, so that's it. That's not it. This is a way to address the problem, and communication is needed and necessary. Hill City is not unique in the fact that we will be on YouTube now. There's many other cities in the country, regardless of size, that either have a live broadcast for this or have it uploaded to YouTube. YouTube is the quickest and most minimal cost that would be associated. The costs for what equipment is needed in order to be able to record these meetings and provide them to the public, or even ourselves if we need them for reference, which sometimes that does come in handy, includes a list of the following. A microphone for $49, cable for $17, and a camera for $79, a total of $105. The only other cost that was brought up that can be discussed is that of what does it take to upload these meetings? What does it take to get it there? We don't have the speed and capability that we do, so on his own time, Brett uploaded those meetings. So there's zero staff cost when it comes to that. So for a total of $204, I find that a very minimal amount to provide additional communication when there's funds being spent on other things that aren't as productive as those things. As far as the access and anyone being able to call into the session, I agree, that is a gap. And that is something that we've been looking at. The cost of the phone is a one-time cost. The most secure way that we can do those phone calls, and now that we know that they're being used, not only by council, but by people that sit in our audience and are members of our community, it seems like it would be a wise investment. There are services that can be used, and Jim, I already gave you a copy of this, GoToMeeting is a service that's utilized by the South Dakota Municipal League as well as other corporations and other city corporations. Our cost for being able to control, understand on the computer who's there, mute people, unmute people, give us a lot more flexibility, allow us the ability to get printed reports of those people that call into our calls is $16 a month. Again, another fee that in light of other costs that have been spent in the city, I feel is minimal relative to what we can accomplish by providing that information. Again, it's not in an attempt to spend money, and as far as a push for communication to the people, I think we're long overdue for that. We need to make sure that people have the ability to go and become involved and aware of what's happening at these meetings. And we need to make sure that these conversations happen in this forum. I'm happy to address any question that anyone has relative to who's doing what, who's on first, why is this happening. But I refuse to debate that over email. So I welcome any report out sessions that we have as the opportunity for the council to be able to communicate. In addition to that, the last thing that was mentioned in the email was that of the liaison roles. Yes, I am taking a look at the liaison roles. I think it's something that needs to be done. Absent of anything that's on the books by way of ordinance to establish those roles, I find it difficult why we would take an organization that is primarily made up of volunteers from our community and pay city council members to go to that meeting when the rest of the makeup of those organizations are volunteer. In addition to that, I'm all about communication. I'm not saying the liaison role is a bad or good thing, but we need to be getting something out of that role. I've heard numerous comments from people that have come up to me on the street and have contacted me and said, we don't ever hear any updates. All I hear is there was a meeting that happened. What happened in that meeting? Well, the communication can go both ways. So while I'm trying to understand from those groups that are involved what the benefit is for them, we also need to understand that groups that we're financing, groups that we provide budget to, should be coming to the city council on a regular basis as well. I'm not saying that we just start doing away with things before we understand, which brings me to the last point, which is research. There was indication that things were done. The phone was done and recording was done without any research. Well, there actually was a lot of research that was done. And unfortunately, we are a little bit behind in the times. It's about time that we step up and we deal with our community and make sure that we move forward. So with that being said, that's the last thing that I have to report out. So I don't have anything else. My time is over for this, so Brett, before I turn it over to you, I think Mr. Peterson has something that he'd like to say.
I do, and I appreciate you answering the question finally, and that's fine if you want to do it in an open forum. I'm more than happy to do that. You speak of that situation as if it was an isolated deal, in that these curb stops, they've already replaced many curb stops, and when I basically briefly talked to the city staff, they scratched their head on it as well. So that's why I brought it to you, the CEO of this organization,
Yep.
to look at how we're spending our money.
Yep.
And to get chastised about accountability
Mr. Peterson,
is what you're really attempting to do here.
I'm not chastising anybody.
Because there's a lot of money spent here that I think is,
Mr. Peterson, we're not talking about money that was spent. We could have lengthy conversations relative to that and how people perceive a waste versus someone else perceives a benefit.
so anyway, appreciate you bringing it to the deal, but I can tell you this, I've watched it 5 other times happen where they ran the hose down the sidewalk. The public works guys dealt with what they dealt with, and here's a Saturday and we got 4 people on staff doing really probably 2-person job. But
Okay?
that could be debated. Anyway, that's, I brought it to your attention, you do what you want with
Absolutely.
it.
And that's exactly what I'm intending to do. There was one other question that was asked that was posed in Johnny's email, or not even a question, but it just speaks to waste of money. A snowplow that had to be returned and a cost that we incurred as a result of it, a bill from Roto-Rooter that was authorized by the city, which was incorrect. And I need you to understand, as you all have been involved in these conversations, that matter has been resolved from a disciplinary perspective, and the appropriate steps were taken to make sure that that was taken care of. So as far as management, That's what management and leadership is. Understanding your staff capabilities, understanding what different people have to offer, and having them work together as a team. I would have made the same decision today, and I'll make the same decision tomorrow, that would have happened with that Saturday curb stop. I saw staff that have never done a curb stop without a leader there, without the public works director there. He was on sick leave at the time. I felt that it was in the best interest of the city to deal with it that way. And the fact that we have had minimal complaints or minimal issues relative to the way that the sidewalk is being implemented, I believe is really a strong statement on leadership and how we're changing how we do things here at the city. So again, thank you for your comments. And as I said, I'm not trying to argue here, but I want to make sure that everyone understands that this is the forum where we should be having these questions. And perhaps bringing questions up at the sake of questions instead of making them accusatory statements or statements that could cause anger. That's not the right way to do it, because that's not respectable on either side. So I stand by my conviction in what we've done and how we're running this city. I invite anyone of City Council or anyone of the public, if you ever have a question on how do things go, how does stuff happen, let us know. That's what we're here for. I heard the call for transparency, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is provide transparency. Brett, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. So sidewalk project. Today was a big day on the sidewalk project. They did 2 pours that bump out. They did the upper sidewalk, at least half of it, and the handicap ramp. So that got poured. And then also the second pour is the lower sidewalk. So that will all get covered up, and hopefully it's nice and warm and toasty. That should get removed, I think, Wednesday late. And so we're going to utilize that ramp going forward to get to the upper sidewalk from the lower. And so it'll help get traffic around, because they've got to start removing the upper sidewalk piece now. So they're doing a great job of making sure that there's access to everybody. For the parade this Friday, hopefully the weather holds for that. They're going to minimize their footprint for their construction, so they're going to move all their equipment out. They're going to move their barrels in so that we can utilize the space. So if there's candy throwing or whatnot, the public can be in that little kind of secured buffer area. So they've been talked to about that, coordinated that. So you'll see there over the next 2 days kind of doing cleanup and organization, just kind of getting it ready for the weekend, because they won't be working Thursday through Sunday, so they're getting a little break as well. Their intent, if you've attended the Monday meetings, their intent is to finish this block of all of the construction in this block between Elm and McGregor by the end of the year. So that means they've got a lot more wall to pour, they've got a lot more lower and upper sidewalk to remove and re-pour. And then obviously the big kind of finale is the railing going into place. I would expect that railing would probably be started to install the week of December 9th. I know that they're still coordinating it with the Iron Company, one of their subs. So it's looking great. I've heard all really good positive feedback, good coordination with the merchants. I just want to thank Public Works staff and the merchants for being patient, and the contractors in the state for such a good project.
Did you want to mention they're bringing on a second crew next week?
Yeah, so they're going to bring on another crew, so they're going to have additional bodies, so they're actually going to get a little bit quicker. The piece that really slows them down isn't the demo work, and it's not the pouring part. That goes pretty quick. Really, it's the upper sidewalk removal, but the biggest one is really the forming of the panels for the wall and the bracing, and then that we're putting that form liner in it so that the concrete finish looks like it's grained wood on the outside of it. So that's the slowest part, but with this other crew, they're going to pick up some time. And so you'll see a lot of bodies going around. The intent is after Thanksgiving, that part from the bump out north to Granite Sports, we're going to try to get that opened up. But the state doesn't want to open that up until the permanent railing is in place for people to utilize. So a lot going on. The next one is the business improvement project. I just met with some of the mechanical engineers working on the senior center addition and the bathrooms. Musgrove and I met with them. They are still going through and putting their notes together. They will have a plan to the architect by next week, they told us today. So that is moving forward. And that is kind of the last piece as it relates to the senior center addition. Most everything else has been worked through. The senior center has looked through their kitchen design. We're tweaking a little bit of their storage space. But most of it is just this mechanical of making sure that we've got the electrical in place, the new propane heat, air conditioning, all of that kind of stuff. So they've told me that their plan will be in next week to the architect. I am working on the alley piece of the Bitboard project. As I stated earlier, we had an electrical engineer that we were working with before, and they actually did the work for the street lighting on Main Street for the sidewalk project. They've been so swamped that we actually said, hey, we need to move on because we need to get this done quicker. So we've moved on to a secondary electrical engineer, and so he's working on the plans. Kale is in contact with him on a daily basis, so that is moving forward. So what we need to do is we need to finalize the plan for the alley. We should be able to do that by the end of December, probably earlier, and then put it out to bid in January. And so we still are in a time frame where we're not losing any time for construction, even though it's taking more time for the electrical engineering. They're just so swamped, same as the mechanical engineer. There's just a lot of projects going on. We're in a good economy right now. So, but if we put that out to bid in January, we still have the opportunity to construct the alleyway and have it put a date in there by June 15th to be completed. So it should only take them about a month to get that done. The water reservoir, I've been in contact with Rural Development. They've asked me for a revised cost estimate, and we need to redo the engineer's agreement that's been in place. I don't know if it's every 10 months or 12 months, they redo the language within the engineer's agreement that they require. So we're working on that. We will produce that revised plan and the engineer's agreement and whatnot and return it to them by December 6th with the revised cost estimates. So that we just got that request from Rural Development. And with the holidays, obviously, it's a little problematic to get a quick turnaround. So that is that project. The Forest Service project, we've obtained the property owner easement from the private owners. So that is done. The last thing that we're working on is with the Forest Service for their approval process for their easement to relocate our sewer line through their property just at the foot of the dam there. The person that we've been coordinating with over the past year and a half actually has been reassigned to another state. And so we're working with a replacement person to get all of that shifted over from them to the NERD person and get it through their channels. I'm hoping that we can get that accomplished before Christmas. I don't know what the Forest Service internal workings are, nor can I control them. So anyway, we're doing what we can on there. Once that's done, we should be able to go out to bid in January for that as well. Again, we're not losing any project time because we won't be starting construction until the fall. So we're looking at like September, October of next year to move forward on that. So that is all I have.
Okay, so I'd just like to follow up on what Brett said. So the process involving the TIF and everything that had to happen, we managed that in such a way where we had multiple players that were working on it, but we got together on the phone one day and we decided what needs to be done to get where we need to be, who has what pieces, and what kind of time commitments are those people gonna commit to be able to get to the place that we needed to at the end of the day. In this particular case, it was a target date that we were marching to, which was based on property sales. That method that we used to handle that Understanding what I call the tasks or the high-level milestones are, and then putting accountability and dates around it is a model that we're going to now continue to use out in these other projects. This is a way to bring visibility so people can understand what's all involved in getting these projects done, as well as keeping ourselves and everyone else that's involved in this process accountable. There's many times that we won't have the ability to drive that commitment date. It's going to have to come from somebody else, but at least if we can get down to the basics to begin with, figure out what the commitments are, and then work to each one of those milestones, you folks will actually see progress and things moving forward. So that's the intention of using it with this particular project in the TIF and then continuing. So we have not had the chance to sit down on these remaining projects, but look for that in the future.
So just one last thing. Obviously, Thanksgiving is coming up on Thursday. The parade is on Friday. I've been coordinating with the Public Works staff. They just finished kind of prepping the wreaths to go up on Main Street and the main highway there. So they've got all of those prepped. That should have been finished by today. So first thing in the morning tomorrow is the plan for the wreaths to go back up on the posts, so that they should be in place for Thanksgiving and for the parade on Friday. And we hope that the weather holds off. So,
Yep.
anyway, so they are coming.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, with no further business, I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session after a 10-minute break.
So moved.
I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.